And so obviously people were looking at it on the day. I think it's gone back up a little bit since then, actually. But the immediate reaction from the investment community was, we don't really understand this, and it's not that obvious why this is a great thing. And I think, and the other thing that I'd say is the APIs bit that they've bought, Vonage actually wasn't involved in that market at all before 2016. Talk about it changing tack several times.
Was that an acquisition as well?
Yeah, so do you know what Vonage paid to get its APIs business?
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. I tell you what, I've got a slightly sort of portentous, apocalyptic feel this week. I was walking in just from Blackfriars. It was cold, it was spitting, the wind was lashing it in my face. I've had a bug, like last weekend, after the pod, I was basically, the pod was Thursday, wasn't it? I was basically in bed Saturday, Sunday, and just sort of crawled out into my little pit home office to work this week. Just with a normal cold, by the way, before anyone freaks out that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then we've got this thing that we were just chatting about before, it's in the news, a new version of COVID that makes the other ones just look like they weren't putting their back into it.
Look like tiddlers.
Yeah. Let's start it off in some little pub in Cape Town, and now it's already in Belgium. And I'm reading the stuff like The Leader and The Spectators, all about Europe freaking out over various draconian measures.
They'd never do that, would they?
Forced vaccinations. You what?
They'd never do that in Europe, surely.
Freak out.
Yeah.
Well, they're having a good go at it. There's been some good civil unrest. And anyway, it just all feels. It definitely feels. What is it? It's like Game of Thrones. Winter is coming. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Winter is coming with Epsilon.
Epsilon. That's what we've got to call it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know my Greek alphabet. Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, Epsilon.
I think we'll be all right until Christmas.
I don't know, man. It's kicking off even over the course of this week. I'd never heard of this Epsilon on Monday.
Well, no one had.
Now it's at the top of the news.
They discovered it, didn't they, this week?
All right, but if it's top of the news now, what's it going to be next week?
Still top of the news.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they'll go, Christmas is cancelled. I'm starting to wonder if they will. Because all the previous...
Oh, they say, we can't afford to cancel Christmas.
Because it works so well, you mean?
But obviously it didn't work, but then no one thought it would work. No one thinks that you can stop a respiratory virus spreading by making people stay at home for a bit.
But they still do it anyway.
Works. I was having a little chat. I was having to explain the vaccine thing to my dad on the phone. I just did a bit of research of my own, because people go, if we can eradicate smallpox, why can't we eradicate coronavirus? But there's two things they forget about. Firstly, it took decades to eradicate smallpox.
Yeah. And
a fair bit of forced vaccination as well. I've only found out about recently.
Well, smallpox isn't a respiratory virus, is it?
Yeah, but it's less that it's respiratory. The method of transmission is still respiratory, though. It's not like, it's not like, I don't know, hepatitis or AIDS or something that has to be directly from blood. You can get it over the air. The biggest difference is DNA versus RNA viruses. So I won't go too deep into the weeds, as we haven't even started the telecoms. And Pierre's already nodding off. But basically, DNA is what our genetic material is made out of. It's quite stable.
Yeah.
RNA is much more unstable, and it's what most respiratory viruses' genetic material is. Flu,
the fact it's changing all the time.
Yeah, so that's why you can't get a permanent flu vaccine. Why you got to get a new one every year, and obviously coronavirus and all these ones are all RNA viruses. So as this South African thing demonstrates, the thing can just mutate like crazy because its basic genetic material is unstable. Yeah. Anyway. So that's why you can't compare it to smallpox. Yeah. We're never going to be able to come up with one sort of silver bullet vaccine for this stuff like we have some other viruses.
Yeah.
And then that's what makes me think they will lock down. It's because they'll go, well, that's all that works, given that all these vaccines that we've been forcing everyone to take for the last year don't work for this new one. Then we've just got to lock everyone down.
I think you're getting ahead
again.
of yourself a bit here anyway.
Well, that's what I'm calling it.
You're coming in and being unusually pessimistic.
Of course I'm getting ahead of myself. Maybe
they don't even know how dangerous it is yet. It's just like they've looked at it through a microscope and it looks like it's got lots of mutations, but there's no. So
this is not scientific advice.
You're really sort of painting
a worse. I should do the Joe Rogan. I'm not a doctor.
You're doing an unusual. You've like had a personality change.
It's like I'm being Ian Eeyore-ish.
Yeah, so I'm going to have to be the optimistic one. I think you're
I'm
getting
absolutely fine with that.
worried.
I I wouldn't say I'm worried. I'm just pessimistic about how this winter's going to play out regarding restrictions and bullshit.
I think there's a realisation's coming that restrictions just don't help. And I think last year there was a call for them before the vaccines were developed. Well, we've got that now, so it's not going to get any better. Anyway, we should talk about telecom.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's interesting. You and I have sort of switched roles on that one.
Yeah.
We'll see. I will, if I turn out to be right, I'll derive no pleasure from it.
Right, in terms of recommending it or thinking it'll happen?
No, I don't recommend it.
Yeah.
It's not for me to recommend anything anyway.
Yeah.
No, this is just what I reckon will happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was chirpy. But other than that...
thanks for that, Scott.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas, mate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hope I'm at the tail end of this.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I'm at the tail end of this bug, so I don't give you guys it, because it's really boring.
Yeah.
What are we going to chat about this week? So I've somehow managed to sort of drag myself to my desk and write some stories. I think the most interesting thing we're going to do, just like last week, we sort of felt a bit self-conscious about doing... don't forget, when I get onto the bit before we start properly, I've got to read out that little review we got on LinkedIn.
Restaurant review.
Yeah, not quite. So we did Open RAN for the second week running last week. We're going to do Ericsson for the second week running this week, because they went and did their biggest acquisition ever of some company called Vonage, is it?
Or Vonage, I don't know.
Vonage.
Quite well known Vonage, but it's been a chameleon over the years.
Yeah, well, quite. I got to admit, I had to do a bit of emergency research as to what's going on with the Vonage. I had to get a bit more Vonage in my head. So maybe I'll hand it over to you on that, having admitted that. But they bought it, and we're going to look at why they bought it and all that. Then I think there's a few, I'm not sure which I should treat as a lead one. There's been a few there's been a couple of sort of operator boardroom stories. There's been the head of Orange had to bail because of something that had nothing to do with Orange.
No. But it did result in him getting a suspended prison sentence.
Indeed, and Orange went like,
which he can't really stay at top job with that.
Sorry, mate, you can't have that. I don't care how innocent you say you are, we can't be having criminals leading the company. Yeah. And then there's also been more shenanigans going on at TIM, which is the artist formerly known as Telecom Italia. Yeah. Which is quite fun to reflect on. So, we'll work out on Monday what the segment's called, Pierre, but it's something to do with
John Cleese in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, as a sorcerer called Tim.
Yeah.
Remember? I can't get that image out of my head whenever I think about Telecom Italia for some reason. I don't know why, but...
Oh, yes.
Doesn't really
what say you, oh Tim? Is he the one who laughs when that rabbit attacks him?
That's it, there's a rabbit that attacks him, yeah.
Classic film.
What's your favourite colour?
Yeah, what's your favourite colour?
Maybe you call it green power?
Green power? What are you talking about?
Section 3.
Section 3, sorry.
Oh, Section 3. Yeah, I don't even know what Section 2 is called. Anyway, we'll worry about it on Monday. Section 3, we're gonna chat about... Jamie got on the phone, talk about how Vodafone's sticking up masts and base stations that are just powered by Mother Nature, which might be worth chatting about. And there was one other operator thing that I can't remember, but it'll come to me. Anyway, that'll do. Just one thing I wanted to mention. We got... some lad on LinkedIn. In fact, I think I can mention it. If it's on LinkedIn, it's in the public domain, so there's nothing, and it's not.
You don't have to read out a name.
But I think I'm going to.
Just render the first name.
Okay, Michael from Cult. I'll put it that. Semi-anonymous. Michael from Cult, who listens to the pod, and he actually commented on that thing I did with Babel, where I did a little interview with them. But anyway, this is verbatim what he says. He goes, "Nice one, Scott. Interesting discussion about the pod. Although I listened to it before," he's referring to this pod, "it's become a bit of a friend during the past 20 months when we've had a lot less interaction with our industry buddies. I end up feeling I've really been down the pub with you guys each week. And now each time I see Ian wandering around a conference, I just want to go up to him and say, 'All right, Ian, fancy a pint?' Except he wouldn't know me from Adam. Keep it up." So thanks a lot for that, Michael. And I just said in response, "Thanks a lot, Michael. That's really gratifying to hear. You'd be surprised how receptive Ian can be when bribed with alcohol." People could read into that what they want. What do they get up to after the pod? It was when we're walking down the South Bank arm in arm, isn't it?
That's very nice, actually. Yeah.
So yeah, nice one, Michael.
Yeah.
So that's a good one to read out, isn't it? And just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site or on Facebook or on YouTube, you can also listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and loads of other podcasting platforms.
And the city of the month is still Hampstead.
Hampstead again. We're on a run with Hampstead.
Yeah. And then the second is, let me read it again. Basking Ridge in New Jersey.
Oh, but New Jersey's big for tech, though, isn't it? That's where I think Bell Labs and Nokia have people there, don't they? In New Jersey. And
I think you're right.
Maybe it's in Basking Ridge.
It might even be. There's things in Basking Ridge.
Basking Ridge sounds like one of those, given that it's in New Jersey, with all due respect to New Jersey, to any of our Basking Ridge listeners, but it sounds like one of those places that sounds a lot more exotic than it is.
I'm going to have to look it up now.
You think of Basking Ridge and you picture sort of South Florida or Hawaii or something like that. Everyone's drinking pina coladas with grass skirts on and shit. I reckon Basking Ridge isn't like that.
Basking Ridge, yeah. Sounds rocky.
Well,
like
yes.
Mineral.
Maybe it's that. Well, the ridge bit, yeah. So, okay, I think that's enough faffing about, isn't it? So I'm going to start off, especially as Ian's looking up Basking Ridge on his phone. I'm going to start off on. You're so easily distracted. I'm going to start off with this Ericsson thing. Where's it gone? Oh, there it is. So Vonage.
Vonage.
Or Vonage.
I think it depends where you're from, how you pronounce it.
Yeah, well, he'd say Vonage, wouldn't he? Because he's French.
Yeah, I'd probably say Vonage rather than Vonage. Vonage is how the Americans would say it, surely. Vantage.
Vonage, yeah.
They'd say fucking Vonage. I've been watching The Sopranos from my sick bed. So
where's the gabagoo?
So I'm just talking like a New Jersey wise guy now.
No, isn't it Staten Island?
It's New Jersey.
Oh, okay. I've never seen
I've just been watching it. We pull in
sorry.
New Jersey's come up more than
there's a lot
all sorts of ways
maybe
today.
Maybe it's in Basking Ridge. I might check that out. That'd be weird.
Yeah.
And they're dropping $6.2 billion on it, which is the most they've ever spent on an acquisition.
It's quite a lot of money.
It's a fair bit of wedge. I don't know what Ericsson's market cap is right now. Shall I look it up?
It's about 33 billion or something.
Right. So it's like a quarter, a fifth of their value. Yeah.
Yeah, I might have that wrong, but I think it's around that level.
Okay, but so that's a big thing. Now,
I mean, it's I only ever check it on Stockholm, and it's obviously in Swedish krona there.
Right, and you've got to do the maths.
Yeah, but
you should check the Nasdaq one out.
Yeah.
And I had to look up. I've got to admit, because as I've said many times, I'm bad at my job. I had to look up what Vonage does, and it's generally known as a sort of. It was originally like a voice over IP thing back when
it was one of the original voice over IP pioneers. It was one of the companies that came along and disrupted all that long distance telephony business. You know, they were offering phones that you could hook up and do
and pay fuck
and
all.
do over IP networks, basically over the internet, and pay sod all. And then that pissed off the carriers. In fact, it's one of the first companies, the whole net neutrality thing, they were one of the first people who got caught up in that whole debate as someone who was sort of, using the pipes and undermining the voice business.
Over the top,
yeah.
So they were like WhatsApp before WhatsApp.
Yeah, but
I mean, it's less sophisticated than that, and it was, you had to get a sort of specific handset, I think, didn't you, and plug it in. So it wasn't that lot.
So it was like a sort of precursor to things like Skype.
Very much so. It was a precursor to. I mean, it's voice over IP rather than internet telephony, so it's the same technology, but it was still over their own. It wasn't like on the public internet. If you see what I mean?
I hear you.
But it completely undermined the whole long distance.
You weren't going through the old switching networks and all that.
Yeah, and then the carriers had to respond and introduce their own IP products, but it basically killed off the sort of long distance business, really.
Well, it's a classic example of why this industry, one of the reasons this industry is so interesting is the rate of obsolescence is really rapid.
Yeah.
You can't count on being at the top of the hill for that long.
Yeah.
And then they evolved into things like unified communication.
Yeah, well, that business that they started, that IP, that voice over IP business, ended up not doing very well because people adapted.
Right.
And then they were just and also if you're a carrier selling a broadband service to somebody, you can sort of package that in, can't you? You can package free calls in.
Indeed.
Whereas
if you're standalone,
Vonage was it never had its own sort of network, so it was always that kind of issue of you get your broadband deal, but then you're going to have to go out and buy a sort of Vonage service as well to run on top of that. And then more recently, obviously, what you just mentioned, Skype has come along, has been and Zoom even more recently.
I think their customer base tended to be enterprise. And maybe even more SME.
Possibly, yeah. I think they had some consumer customers though. I mean, I think they call that a consumer. The bit that's left.
That's true. I remember
that is called a consumer business.
I'm looking at
now.
the charts that I copied from Ericsson's, and I don't think I put that.
I mean,
one in.
the more
they
recent,
did have one that talked about the consumer side.
They went down that sort of unified communications route, which I find a very hard market to get my head around.
I agree.
To be honest with you.
But it's completely germane to this whole discussion because
a bit of that is more
clearly.
Yeah. I think it's a very specific bit of that business that they're after.
Well, so unified comms. I can remember for years I've had people like Microsoft take me to lunch to explain this stuff.
Yeah,
and I've had to drink myself senseless. Just
Zoom is classed as a unified comms player,
right?
But it's obviously one that's got a bit more of a kind of
and I guess Teams is the culmination
and then you've got
of
the
Microsoft.
Specialists would be companies like Ring Central. 8x8 is it, or 8x8? I don't know how you pronounce it, but and then Vonage is another big player. But what is the point? I mean, if we had to summarise what unified comms is, it seems to be taking sort of communications over IP, but trying to group together voice and digital and video and presentations and collaboration, and all this stuff, and just have hence unified this one ring to rule them all. Totally.
When it comes to communicating over digital means.
Yeah. And some companies have done really well at it. And Ring Central is a classic case of a company that's done really well out of its sort of position in unified comms. I mean, obviously Microsoft's a big player in that market now, and with Teams, as you say. But I think Teams probably, for most people who aren't specialists in that market, that's probably the best way to try and understand it, I think, isn't it? Is to think about what you get with Microsoft Teams. Because a lot of people have had exposure to that,
and we use it internally.
Pandemic. We use it internally.
Although I think trying to get you to realise I've sent you a message on Teams is a bit of a challenge, I've got to say.
It's just something to do with using a Mac. It doesn't
give you alerts
properly. You don't get an alert. Whereas on the Dell, I used to get a sort of pop-up thing.
It's in the settings.
Sort the settings out, mate. Sometimes I need to collaborate with
the same thing.
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to change settings. I don't have administrator rights.
I don't think you need them for that.
You probably do.
It's just notifications.
Anything I try and change on it tells
it's
me.
It's more like installing or uninstalling software rather than changing settings within something's already installed.
I can even change the time on my computer without asking an administrator.
That's annoying.
And then I asked the administrator and they didn't respond. So
no, I haven't got time. So that's all that, and you can see the use of it, and I can see that Teams has some utility, and I'm sure, as journalists, we're actually not very collaborative. We basically just sit in our little sort of isolated cell and write our own stuff, don't we?
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's lots of other areas of business where they're having to constantly ping everyone for their 10 cents worth, or their sign-off or whatever. So I can see all that. And then another big area for UC, or let's say a parallel area, is call centre.
Yeah.
Most people don't realise, I'm sure I've shared this anecdote on the pod before, but most people don't realise their first couple of layers of interaction with any call centre is automated now.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly any chatbot that's through text chat windows is going to be automated. And they actually got quite sophisticated at the voice side of it as well. Do you need another tin? Made short work of that, mate. Do you want another Hazy Jane?
Yes, please.
And so there's a lot of money in that. More importantly, there's a lot of money to be saved because obviously, if you've got an old-fashioned call centre, that's why they used to always outsource them to India and that sort of thing. It's really expensive.
Yeah.
To have all these people sitting there just so someone can ring up and go, my Wi-Fi doesn't work, and you have to talk them through it. So there's a lot of investment in that where I can see a sort of more, you can see there a little bit where Ericsson might want to get involved in something that it might sell, if not to operators, then to other industry verticals, but as a sort of part of a communications offering.
Yeah, I don't think the reason that Ericsson's bought it is anything to do with unified communications.
We'll get into it. Why don't you get into why you think they bought it then?
So, it's not just me actually, it's what a lot of analysts are thinking. So it sort of seems to be the consensus view is that the main thing that Ericsson's got bought Vonage for is the APIs business, which is actually a part of, they have this thing called the Vonage communications platform, which includes the unified communication stuff, but a kind of sub bit of that is this APIs business. So APIs, application programming interface. I'm sure we've talked about them before on the pod. I guess it's like the glue between, that allows you to, for instance, if you're writing those two-factor authentication SMS messages that go around, you get a company like Twilio to make sure that it works on all operators' platforms, basically.
And there'd also be APIs for devices or ecosystems.
For everything. There are all sorts of things.
If you want to write a bit of software that works with, let's say, an iPhone, an API is going to kick in somewhere.
So instead of having to do bespoke things for every single operator that you're working with, it's like a sort of.
It's almost like a translator. It's like if you plug in your thing at one end of the API, it will translate it into the language that the iPhone or
Rosetta
the device
Stone.
What did you say?
Rosetta.
Like a Rosetta or a Babel fish in.
Yeah, and that seems to be the bit that's caught Ericsson's interest.
Right.
And based on the investor call, what they seem to think that they can. I mean, one of the reasons it's caught its interest is because that market's really growing fast. So it's the fastest growing bit of Vonage. And it's also
API bit.
And
which
it's
is funny
also
because APIs themselves, as we've just covered, have been around for ages.
They are, and I never realised actually until this deal happened, and I started sort of looking at things that people like Dean Bubley were posting about it.
Yeah, I put a Bubley tweet in my story.
I never even realised that it was a big market in itself. You just sort of think of APIs as something that companies do that links stuff together. To me, that's how I've always imagined them. But this idea that APIs are traded and sold was. And that it's actually big business. So the APIs market, apparently, according to Ericsson, and I don't know where they get there, they probably get their data from somewhere else, but they were saying last year that addressable market was worth $6 billion, and by 2025 it'll be worth $22 billion. So, and they were saying that even like more than half the size of the radio access network market. They specifically said that in their presentation.
Which is, I would love to see the modelling that creates the sizing.
But it is. If you look at Vonage's results, Vonage, whatever. If you look at their results, the bit that's growing really quickly is APIs, and
they've actually been on an uptick in terms of earnings.
And they've been but the real sort of powerhouse is this APIs business. And what it sounds like Ericsson wants to do is take these APIs. So they've got I think they've got about 1.1 million developers who work with the sort of Vonage system, and have them kind of pivot from doing the stuff they've been doing, which is things like SMS and SIP trunking and all these kinds of things that don't really have a lot to do with 5G actually, and somehow kind of pivot them to writing applications that have use in a 5G context,
or writing APIs that enable other people to plug into 5G.
Totally, yeah. But the point is you'd still be selling those and making money out of it.
Yes, and then the other thing I took from it, I agree with everything you said. The other thing I took from it is a more bigger picture part of the Ericsson strategy. In fact, in a bit, I'll read out some of what Atcombe, his canned comment on it, because obviously
that is
that's
the
horse's mouth
thing, surely.
Yeah, well, but their point is that they've realised, and presumably realised a while back, that there's not a lot of money going on in 5G in and of itself. A bit more bandwidth, a bit of low latency. The money is helping, yes, operators, but also other industries to do clever shit with it, which is probably where the low latency stuff kicks in a little bit more, and the network slicing, and maybe the sort of using millimeter waves, like we've chatted about in a recent pod, using millimeter waves in certain confined environments to have sort of ultra high bandwidth for whatever.
Yeah.
But it's all about finding a way of getting these industries that don't necessarily have much telecoms or IT core competence, and getting them together with 5G and making beautiful new use cases.
I mean, the idea is for these APIs to be something you target at the enterprise sector. Yeah. I mean, there could be things that are relevant to operators as well, actually, telecom operators. But the people seem to think it fits into the kind of 5G enterprise story more. So you might have APIs for making sure that machine equipment in a factory sort of works properly and communicates with other things. Yeah?
Exactly.
But this is why I'm sceptical of the whole thing is, and again, this isn't really me. This is sort of me sort of looking at what people like Dean and a guy called Tom Rebeck, who works for Analysis Mason, and James Crawshaw from Omdia have been saying, is that it's not immediately obvious that these Vonage developers, the 1.1 million of them who've been doing things like SMS and APIs for that, can suddenly pivot to doing 5G network APIs, yeah? it's quite a leap of logic. And I don't think it's been that well explained by Ericsson. No, and that seems to be the main concern over it.
Well, so you say how well explains it been by Ericsson. It seems like a good time, if that's all right, for me to read out what Ekholm said.
Yeah.
So this is a quote from him from the press release. The core of us, I'm not going to do a Swedish accent. I was apologising when we went to that Ericsson thing, going sorry for doing a shit Swedish accent. They didn't seem to give a toss. Say that about the Swedes. They'll be like, yeah, whatever. Do what you got to do, mate. I don't really care.
Yeah.
So the core of our strategy. No, I said I wasn't going to do it. The core of our strategy is to build leading mobile networks through technology leadership. Well, yeah. This provides the foundation to build an enterprise business. So that's the sort of key sort of bit. The acquisition of Vonage is the next step in delivering on that strategic priority. I'm going to read a bit more because there's quite a lot of it, but I put it all in because it all seemed to have substance, unlike a lot of canned comments.
Yeah.
So the next paragraph, he goes, Vonage gives us a platform to help our customers monetize the investments in the network, benefiting developers and businesses. Imagine putting the power and capabilities of 5G, the biggest global innovation platform, which is questionable, but there we go, at the fingertips of developers. Then back it with Vonage's advanced capabilities in a world of 8 billion connected devices. Today we're making that possible. I'm not going to keep going. There's a couple more. But yeah, that's more or less consistent with everything we just said. But I completely agree with you. So he goes, I suppose a key bit is imagine, he goes, imagine putting the power and capabilities of 5G at the fingertips of developers. So that's the big if.
Yeah, and obviously analysts who know a lot more about APIs and all that kind of stuff than I do are questioning this. And I think the thing, I've got a simple rule with acquisitions actually these days, because you can look at all the fancy numbers around it, and I'll come to that in a minute, but how much has been spent and does it make sense based on what this company's earnings are, and that's how financial analysts would look at it, isn't it, generally speaking. And I think there are question marks over this deal in that respect as well. But the other way I look at things is it immediately easy to work out what the benefit is? You know, and if you look at the three significant deals that have happened under Ekholm, one was for a German antenna business called Kathrin,
which made sense. No one had a problem
they're
with
doubling down on the RAN, and they didn't have a very strong antenna business. Go figure. The other one was this $1 billion move for Cradlepoint. They want to get into the enterprise market. Cradlepoint makes wireless products that it sells to enterprise customers.
Yeah.
Go figure. Then there's this one, and you kind of go, right, okay, they're not really interested in this VoIP consumer thing because it's slowly dwindling. Unified Communications doesn't tie at all into Ericsson's story about 5G. In fact, nothing Vonage does is 5G
take on
at
Microsoft
all.
or whatever in UC.
Yeah, there's not anything about Vonage that's to do with 5G. Oh, they want to get this API stuff and somehow use that to marry their 5G expertise to it and write APIs that will be useful in a 5G world. Yeah. And it's a real sort of I mean, it's no wonder you look at Ericsson's share price. I think the day that the announcement came out, it went down about 6% that day, which is I worked out it was $2.5 billion wiped off its value.
I'm pleased you use the approved verb there. When you lose share value, you've got to use the word wiped.
That is the cliche, isn't it?
You actually get arrested if you don't use the word wiped.
Yeah. So obviously people were looking at it on the day. I think it's gone back up a little bit since then actually, but the immediate reaction from the investment community was, we don't really understand this, and it's not that obvious why this is a great thing. And I think, and the other thing that I'd say is the APIs bit that they've bought, Vonage actually wasn't involved in that market at all before 2016. Talk about it changing tack several times.
Was that an acquisition as well?
Yeah. So do you know what Vonage paid to get its APIs business? $250 million.
So that's done right.
2 acquisitions. One of a company called Nexmo in 2016, which I think is the bulk of that, and then a smaller one 2 years later is someone called Talkbox, and that brought it the APIs business, and that altogether came to about.
That was how long ago?
2016 and 2018,
okay.
two acquisitions.
So they've had, I mean, obviously the ROI on those acquisitions, if we take it literally, is high, but then they've had.
Well, it looks incredibly canny if you're a Vonage person.
Yeah, but they've had to do something positive with those acquisitions. I mean, they've had 5 years to fuck it up and they haven't. So.
Yeah, and it's grown a lot since then, obviously. I mean, look at the rate of growth in the third quarter. I think API's revenues were up 43%. Year on year, so it's growing, and but to then sell that 5 years later because that everybody pretty much thinks that's the reason Ericsson bought this.
Even if we're generous and we only say that's half of the value that Ericsson attached to it, that's still a big ROI.
Yeah, and I think this is the question. A lot of people are saying 6.2 billion is all the money that Ericsson had in net cash on its balance sheet at the end of September.
And it did pay for it in cash as well, didn't it?
It paid for it in net cash that they had on its balance sheet.
So they've just,
it's all of it.
Just blown all their wedge.
Which they've made a big deal about how what a great net cash position they have.
Not anymore.
Yeah, and a lot of people are saying, couldn't they do this? Couldn't they do that themselves, kind of thing? Wouldn't it have been easier, given all the question marks about this?
But isn't that a question about all M&A?
Well, it is, but the point is that there's a massive disconnect between the 6.2 billion and only 5 years ago, what Vonage spent to get these businesses. All right, they're bigger than they used to be. They're generating more revenue, but the developers that, if you look at Vonage's annual report and you look at the kind of things that these APIs support at the moment, nothing has anything to do with 5G at all.
No,
There's
here's
mention
a good one.
of it.
In my story, I was like you. I was looking and seeing what analysts were publicly saying to get some sense of it. And we got our mate, former guest on the pod, Dean Bubley. He was pretty quick out of starting blocks.
He was.
He even whacked out a sort of LinkedIn. He likes to do.
Well, I referred to his LinkedIn.
Yeah,
thing.
so
I
just embedded his tweet that referred to it. And anyway, and then beneath that, he goes, his first sort of follow up to his initial tweet, plugging his LinkedIn thing, goes, I think it's very brave to imagine that a developer who does CPaaS, which is Communications Platform as a Service, which is, we haven't talked about AS, but a lot of where these things,
all the unified comms stuff works on that basis.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all evolved to this as a service model. So a developer who does CPaaS for doing dentist appointment reminders or mobile app two-factor authentication is going to switch to consuming network APIs for 5G slices or writing R apps. I don't know what an R app is.
And R apps, we talked about that last week.
Oh, did we?
That's RIC. That's near real time.
Well, that's right. So he goes R apps for an Open RAN RIC.
That's actually non-real time RIC.
Okay, well, fair enough.
Yeah.
So, and I think he's got a good point. And then he finished off by going, not all developers are the same. So just because you're a developer doesn't mean you're this.
Totally, yeah. So I mean, it could be if his worst fears come true, let's say, and they can't pivot this easily, then Ericsson's basically spent 6.2 billion to get a bunch of developers that aren't really going to help.
A bunch of geeks who are going to get the arsehole and go and play D&D instead.
Yeah, what I would say is that if the market's growing that quickly, if this, you look at the API's business, Vonage, even with, let's forget about 5G and just look at what they're doing, this SIP trunking and two-factor authentication and all that kind of guff, and it's on this kind of growth curve like that. Great, maybe it's just a growing business and it's a good thing for Ericsson. But it doesn't really tie into the Ericsson story, does it? It's not like
no.
I mean, they've very much attached this to 5G. They very much made this big deal about how they can get these guys to do 5G network. I mean, this has been talked up. You just read Boy Eckholm's quote. And that's the big question mark, I think, about this, a really big one.
Yeah, where it does tie in a much more broad, woolly, unspecified strategic way is, which is where people, myself included, did think about that Cradle Point acquisition, is Ericsson just building up its whole straight to enterprise offering? Like we, Ericsson, what we traditionally do is sell radios to CSPs.
Yeah.
But we can, to you, agricultural vertical, industrial vertical, logistics vertical, we can sell you this complete communications thing, whatever it is, and I'm struggling to work out exactly what that would be.
But this is why I find that this is a weird deal in a way, is because, if I spoke with Boy Eckholm in August about various things, and one of the things he said then was we probably need to make more enterprise acquisitions to support our enterprise growth strategy. And so
he wasn't lying, was he?
Keeping an eye out for what's going on. I never saw something like Vonage coming.
No.
And then you look at it now and you think...
You're going Vonage, are you sticking with Vonage? I'm
going to use it interchangeably. I'm going to go French-American. But I thought it was going to be something like maybe they go out and buy, like very much like Cradle Point, another company that did products in a particular vertical market, let's say, that would get them involved in that more. Now, maybe this is a lot more clever. I don't know. I don't want to. I don't want to come down and say this is a disastrous deal. I didn't say that in the thing I wrote.
We're just no one's sure.
It's just one that raises a real
and it's the price tag.
Question mark.
If it was the same price tag, Cradle Point was about $1 bill.
Yeah.
This is $6 bill. I mean, if it was like $1 or $2 bill, then you'd be like, all right, fair enough, roll the dice.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, God, completely irrelevant, but I was having a little IM chat with my mates about football.
Yeah.
And two of my mates on this group are Arsenal fans, and me and one other mate are Spurs fans. And Spurs just had some really shit result in Europe, like where they couldn't even beat like the worst team. I think they're Slovakian, actually. Slovakian or Slovenian, I get them mixed up. Something in this.
Oh, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
All those Slavic countries.
Well,
are
they were
basically
bloody same, innit? I think it was Slovakian, and they were like the shittest team. They're not even that good in Slovakia. And Spurs still lost. And we're having this little chat.
Slovenia. It was Slovenia's
Slovenia.
champion. Yeah.
All right, not Slovakia.
Great
sorry.
last-minute goal. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. Pierre, let's remind everyone, is an Arsenal fan. So. Arsenal fans. I've realised Arsenal fans get more pleasure from Spurs failure than vice versa.
Yeah.
There's some kind of weird mania.
I think it's because you don't care that much. I think Spurs do love a bit of Arsenal.
Yeah, well, I know there's that North London
you're not
tribal.
Really all in. With
exactly.
No, I'm not. I'm not.
Neither am I. But
much to the irritation of my friends who try and get a rise out.
You're all in.
No, I'm a bit more in than
you
Scott.
Loved that.
You're a bit more in the me that you enjoyed Spurs' failure anyway. I'm genuinely indifferent about Arsenal's success or failure. In fact, when Arsenal does really well in Europe, back in the day, back when you were good, Pierre.
Yeah, 10 years ago.
I was cheering them on. I felt more just sort of English. I'll cheer on any English club against bloody foreigners.
You've got to bring this back to Ericsson now.
And yes, there is method to my madness. We were looking at transfers. There's this excellent website called Transfermarkt. It's presumably German.
Yeah.
And you can just see it's a total online database of all transfers. And we looked at Spurs transfers over the last few years, and they've basically all been shite.
Yeah.
And the thing about transfers is you assess them entirely on their value. So we buy some lad, speculatively buy some 19-year-old from Spain who may turn out to be a superstar or not. And we spend 10 million on him, whatever. If we spend 50 million on him, it's a different fucking story, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's the sort of toughest thing. Oh, I've got a cough as well. That's the toughest thing that Ericsson's got going against it, and why its share price probably went down, and why it's got people. I should also call out, in the same story, I actually got I would say uncharacteristically snarky tweet from our own Gabriel Brown, who as we know, doesn't like controversy. And he tweeted, in response to an initial tweet about this from Patrick Donegan, he tweeted, "Everyone is calling less. Let's buy a VoIP company." And then he goes, and then he doubled down and went, "Reminds me of Ericsson buying TV companies when TV viewing was halfway down the precipice." So I thought, go on, Gabe, putting your foot in.
Well, I mean, it is a hard one to get your head around this, I have to say. I mean, in their defence, these projections of API's growth are like impressive, and also Vonage, it should be pointed out, is the number 2 player in that market after Twilio, and its own revenues have been going up a lot. And Boy Ekholm's had a really successful stint, hasn't he, since he came in 2017? I mean, he's proven people wrong a few times.
Well, that's the point I
think
made.
We were questioning whether he was the right appointment. I think when he came in at first, he was doing things
himself.
He was selling bits of the business, and he was. He was going on about how he's a rookie and sounding quite unsure and not confident. Yeah. I mean, he's really kind of turned it around in a really sort of clever way, I think. And
yeah.
But
also in a steady, measured way.
In a steady, measured way. I mean,
that's what's incongruous about this.
This is the reason this one sort of rings a few alarm bells, because it's almost like the Vestberg era is coming back a bit. They went off and like Gabe was alluding to there, they went off and started buying TV companies and doing this and that. And how Vonage really fits into their 5G strategy is the big thing that I have an issue with.
Or any strategy, apart from generally wanting to be better at
everything. Yeah, but it's just. I mean, the other thing we should say about that even if the thing does work out with this APIs, pivoting these guys to 5G and get them to do 5G network APIs, and it's all very good and works quite well. This takeover sort of lumbers Ericsson with a couple of things that it doesn't really want, it seems, or that aren't really very strategic at all. I mean, this slowly perishing consumer business they've got is one side of that, and then a lot of the UCaaS stuff to me, just I don't see why Ericsson would want to really be in that market.
I mean, is it one of these weird acquisitions where they've already mapped out bits that they're going to carve off and try and flog?
Yeah, well, this is what I'm wondering as well. Do they try and get rid of some of it now that they've?
It's what I wonder about that. I've never worked in M&A. I've never been at the top table, or indeed any table in a corporate sense, apart from my own little special table in the corner, where people throw food at me to sort of run with the metaphor. But the thought of buying a big load of something when you only just want one bit of it, and you're going to hive off the other bits, that strikes me as intrinsically value diminishing, because of course anyone you sell it to is going to know that they're in a strong bargaining position.
Exactly, that's the thing. Who wants to? No one's going to want to buy the consumer bit, right?
Yeah.
And
well, they will, but they'll buy it for fuck all because they know Ericsson doesn't want it. But this is
probably why they had to buy the whole thing, because they couldn't just go and buy the APIs business. Because Vonage themselves are like, well, that's the bit we really like. You know, that's the bit we don't want to just be left with our.
They probably had that chat, didn't they?
Our dwindling consumer.
Just give us that.
We just want the APIs business. Yeah. Oh, what? So you're going to leave us with this rubbishy consumer business? It's like doing that every year.
We can't be bothered.
And then if they can't have, this is the other thing. Once you separate the APIs thing from the rest of the VCP Vonage communications platform, it sort of undermines a lot of what they're doing. I guess, doesn't it? So. They couldn't really do that either, but it kind of leaves them with.
So it's
a weird deal.
To summarise it feels like an uncharacteristic roll of the dice by Ecom, who's been very measured, restrained. I say, things like the Catrain acquisition can argue with that.
Well, that was quite small, and I don't think anybody was really sort of batting an eyelid about that.
No, it's some sort of arcane German engineering company. You always figure
it was very highly regarded.
Well, that's what I mean. I don't mean arcane in a bad way. I just mean you figure. If it's an established German engineering company, it must be pretty hot shit.
And antennas are quite important if you're going to be a RAN player. So it rounded out a weakness in their proposition, basically. And Cradlepoint, I mean, there were questions over Cradlepoint, actually, and that hasn't really shown why it was such a good move yet. I don't think Cradlepoint. There's not been it. It's growing quite quickly, but it's still relatively small in the sort of context of Ericsson, revenues being whatever it is, 25 billion a year.
That was about a year ago, and at the time I called it the biggest piece of M&A in the Ecom era, and that was a sixth of the size of it.
And this is massive. It's a massive deal for something that's quite questionable. But we might all be proven wrong. It might be a real sort of clever one. I just think M&A takeovers that tend to be quite hard to get your head around don't often.
Do you know what we should do? Sorry, you carry on.
I was just going to say, it's not even just takeovers. You remember that Cisco Ericsson deal that happened, I think, before Ecom was there? That Cisco Ericsson partnership? Oh, we're going to have this kind of alliance because Nokia's buying Alcatel-Lucent, and we feel there needs to be some sort of marriage.
There
needs to be some sort of marriage of Cisco's IP.
And it was obviously a bullshit
They can never really explain why it made sense. And they came up with all these convoluted sort of, it's good to have a sort of IP player that does enterprise stuff. Partnering with,
even at the time, it was either just merge properly.
Yeah,
it was like one of those will they, won't they little rom-com things.
It was, yeah.
It's like either merge properly or shut the fuck up.
Yeah, and obviously it's gone nowhere, and it almost sounds like it's defunct.
And isn't it hilarious how it just petered out and no one talks about it? Yeah. It's almost like an embarrassing fling.
Well, I'd be interested to see if you asked about it now, and I probably had the opportunity when I was speaking to Ecom in August, but there were other more important
because they never officially pulled the plug on it, did they?
He'd probably go, well, it's not really a thing anymore. I suspect is what he would have said.
Just
I don't want to
bullshit
put words into his
knee-jerk
mouth,
reaction.
He wasn't responsible for that, by the way. So I think that will happen under Vestberg.
And I tell you what. In hindsight, if they'd gone full M&A, Cisco and Ericsson, I don't think it would have ended well.
It's funny looking back on Vestberg. I don't know when Vestberg took charge of Ericsson's CEO, but he left it in a pretty disastrous shape, didn't he? I
think so.
It's funny because
strategically,
CEOs are quite often like in the telecom sector. It seems they're often quite like going back to football. They're like football managers, aren't they? They start off and things are good for a while, and then it all starts to go Pete Tong.
Oh, we've already got Conte out at Spurs,
and before you know it, they pop up. They pop up somewhere else, and now he's over in America at Verizon. And
like Mourinho, who's at Spurs recently, is a classic example of that. Every time they leave a job, it's because they're shit,
Yeah.
And then every time they get hired again, it's because they've got a great track record.
Yeah.
It's just weird. I agree.
It doesn't work lower down the food chain, does it? You know, if you're just a sort of ordinary reporter, and you turn out to be shit, then you don't pop up at Bloomberg a few months later and he's brilliant.
I could say some contentious things about
maybe
the conventional media.
Maybe you do, but
on that one. But I won't, because I'm diplomatic. Say what you want about me. All right, we better leave that there. But I think it is interesting. Just one other thing I want to reflect on, actually. So you and I haven't spoken to each other all week. I haven't been feeling very chatty anyway.
I was off on Monday anyway.
And you were off. Oh yeah, happy birthday!
Oh, thank you very much.
What? When was his birthday?
That's what took Monday off. Apparently, you get a free holiday on your birthday.
Well, happy birthday then.
So
don't get me started on holiday. Anyway,
not a particularly significant birthday, but not like his last one.
Still good enough for a bottle of fucking Eagle Rare though. Tight bastard.
I didn't know it was a birthday.
No, I don't expect people to buy me an Eagle Rare
every year. He set the precedent. I didn't buy him anything anyway, so I can't exactly hassle you.
Get me a beer afterwards if you want.
All right. Yeah.
Then we'll call it quits.
We'll call it quits. Yeah. He drops over 30 quid. I'll buy you a £6 pint. No, it's just it's interesting. This pod, like last week, we had a colleague. I won't name him, but we had a colleague sort of get in touch with us on email, going, "He enjoyed the chat last week, and he wanted to follow up on it." And it's interesting. Yours and my responses kind of echoed each other, didn't they? And then both our coverage of this Ericsson thing kind of echo each other, and it's really not because we collaborate at all. No, I just think my feeling is when you're being a proper journalist, there is only one sort of pure perspective on a thing. It doesn't mean you're right. It doesn't mean you're Nostradamus. But when you've got something like this, and Ericsson's spent a lot of money and done an insufficient job of explaining why, that's the only journalistic angle to take.
Yeah.
And anyone who goes, yeah, it's definitely going to be brilliant or it's definitely going to be shit, isn't being honest.
Yeah.
It's just a bit of healthy skepticism, which is basically a journalist's job. And I just find it interesting to reflect on how you and I quite often end up on the same angle, completely independently of each other.
Yep.
And I'll take that as evidence of us being good journalists. Other people might beg to differ. There we go.
That's their right.
So what else? I was going to talk about some boardroom shenanigans, wasn't I?
Yeah.
So I think the biggest one, I mean, this hasn't actually got that much to do with telecoms, but fuck it. It's something to chat about, isn't it?
Well, it doesn't.
This is the orange one.
It doesn't in a technical sense, but it does in terms of, leadership and what it means for them post that era.
Well, yes, that's a good point. So Orange's CEO for the last, I think, 7 years has been this bloke called Stefan
Richard.
When you've got the little accent above the E in the first E in Stefan, is it like Stefan? Steph?
Is
it just Stefan?
It's an E with an accent?
Yeah, it's like an acute, I think.
Yeah, so it's E, not
Stefan.
Stefan.
And what if you didn't have the acute on it? How would you pronounce it?
Stefan.
Stefan.
Yeah,
Stefan. There we go.
It's never like that.
Yeah, well, 'cause an English person would never say Stefan, but I just get my head around the accents.
Yeah. So the accent that way is E, and the other way is A. It's a bit different.
Oh.
E A.
It's the acute accent
and the grave.
The grave.
Yeah.
And then they have
circumflexes and all that rubbish.
Yeah, that's just nonsense.
So that's like a little hat over, like a Chinese
a little hat, and the Germans start
and the two dots.
Start chucking dots around.
We had that too.
Like it's goddamn Morse code.
Yeah.
Spanish have cedillas. We don't really have any accents. We don't mess with our letters. It's just like you got 26 letters. That's it. That's all you got, mate.
You've got no accent whatsoever. Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
No, we don't have any accents.
None.
Weird, eh? Except for a fucking London accent, innit? Anyway.
Well, Rob is your father's brother.
Exactly.
It took me a while to find that quote, by the way. It's nowhere near, but
he put Robert's your father's brother from Lock, Stock into the.
It's that shitty screen recording.
Yeah, that's good.
I was going to watch that the other day for some reason. It just popped up on Netflix. I thought,
it is a great film.
It is a good film.
That guy is in a football game, a football movie as well. He's got great monologues.
Yeah, he's like a sort of poor man's Ray Winston.
Giving it large. Yeah.
Anyway, so Stefan Richard has been chairman and CEO for like a decade of Orange. Sorry, Orange Group. Orange. There we go. Orange. And in 2019, so there's been this ongoing thing. Before he's Orange.
Do you reckon they should change the word for each country they're in? Like, what is it in Spanish? Or
Naranja.
That'd be so confusing.
Yeah, no, that's true. They should do that. I think it would make life more fun.
It'd be much more fun, I think.
And before that, he was in. Do you need another?
Yeah,
going through him, man. Damn, you're on a
I've only had two. It's only a pint.
That's my one, isn't it? My leftover
It's only a pint in 45 minutes or whatever it's been.
Do you want a Punk, Camden Pale, or a Sierra Nevada?
Can I try Sierra Nevada?
Yeah. Got our little mini fridge.
Yeah, thank you
It's
very
so
much.
opulent. And before that, he was in the French government, and he was chief of staff to Christine Lagarde when she was the finance minister, which I guess is like Chancellor of the Exchequer or something.
Yeah.
And cut a long story short, this one bloke, they forced him to flog some shares, and then he moaned, and then they paid him off to the tune of about 400 million.
This is Bernard Tapie.
That's it, yeah.
Bernard Tapie. That's a character from my childhood.
Is it?
Oh yeah, he used to own the Marseille team, and
Well, he's obviously dodgy as.
there's some dodginess. But he's such a character
As
on
dodgy as
TV
they
all the
come.
time.
I think you
Like
should. I think you should slightly nuance your allegations
well, no, because
from now
it's
on.
not an allegation anymore, is it?
He was a classic
Well, I don't
business
know.
guy.
Well, he's been convicted. Like Stefan Richard's been convicted of a year. He's been sentenced to a year, suspended, hasn't he? So
I know,
it's not- it's not-
but was Tapie not dodgy before that, and now he is?
well, I don't know.
No, Tapie's
but-
fine now, but back in the 90s, he was.
Well, anyway,
yeah.
I'm sure he has dodgy inclinations. I just sometimes wonder, not that Tappy's listening to this, I sometimes wonder whether just outright accusing people of shit is something we need
Well,
to be
maybe with
careful
Tapie we need to be careful of, but I think with Richard we can say he's a criminal.
Yes.
We don't have to get alleged.
Yeah, but I
with
called
him.
you up on Tappy, not
Okay, well,
Richard.
I'll be more careful with Tapie. Allegedly, Tappie's a criminal.
Yeah, allegedly. That's it. All you got to do is throw in a
and Richard is a
caveat.
criminal.
Yeah, he is a criminal according to this appeals
According
court.
to the French.
So
legal system.
long and short of it is, Christine Lagarde authorised a payoff to this guy. They looked into it. They thought that was dodgy. They thought probably quite rightly. Again, see, probably. I put in probably. And I can defend that. I'm not saying it's an absolute allegation.
They thought it was. What's the probably for?
Probably this payoff that Christine Lagarde authorised the French government to make to Tapie was probably dodgy.
Yeah.
And then there was all sorts of things. In the end, Lagarde got found guilty of just some minor negligence, which didn't stop her getting made head of the fucking European Central Bank, which shows what a fix all this
she's
is.
got like short white hair, yeah?
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, no.
She looks
She's always
a bit
got a
like
massive tan.
She looks like a female
Right.
version of Gandalf.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
No, she does though.
Can't have the white.
She looks yes.
Or il ne passe pas. Did I get that about right? You shall not pass was his quote.
Oh, that's
in
right.
that.
Yeah.
Vous ne passerez pas.
Oh, shit.
Oh,
Well,
never
that's
mind.
halfway
Yeah, it was a
there.
good effort though.
Given that I know
like-
bugger all French, that's not a bad effort. Anyway, and then she appeared to throw him under the bus because he was her chief of staff, and she sort of went, "Well, I didn't really know what was going on. It's all on him. He was talking shit. I just signed the thing,"
Yeah.
which I think is a really sort of disingenuous thing to say. I mean, the whole point of the sort of chain of command and all that sort of thing is, of course, you got advisors, but the buck still stops with you.
Yeah.
You can't throw your advisors under the bus. It looks like she did. And then he got cleared in 2019. This has been going on forever. I mean, this original case was like, 20 years ago or something, 15 years ago. He got cleared by a court of doing anything wrong. But then they took it to an appeals process, which culminated this week, where they went, no, actually, we think you did do something wrong. I'm trying to see. Oh, yeah. He was found guilty of complicity in the misuse of public funds and gave him a 1-year suspended prison sentence.
That happens a lot in France.
Yeah. I know. Well, that's socialism for you.
There was the one with the candidate back in the Macron first election where he was giving his wife like a dodgy job and pay her like massive
And didn't
salaries.
Sarkozy got done on some
Oh yeah, but
shit
that was
like that
was
as well.
worse. I think his. I can't
Yeah.
remember. It was something with Gaddafi, I think, or something like that.
Look, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I
And Chirac as well, but he was senile, so
he
they
was
kind of
even
let it
worse.
go.
Well, I semi-joked about socialism. More to the point, it just happens when you give a small group of people loads of cash. They're always going to dick about with it. Whether that cash comes from socialism or whether it comes from being like Mark Zuckerberg or whatever, when you got one person that's got a load of cash, they're gonna chuck it around to.
Yeah, it seems to happen a lot in France though, doesn't it?
And then
That's a good point,
Off
actually.
the top of my head, there's also the Nissan Ceo, also a French guy.
Yeah. What I love is all these
What's going
people.
on? You tell us.
yeah,
Pierre.
I don't know.
Why are French so dodgy?
I love all these people on Twitter who are sort of Remainers who've gone to live in France, and they're always sort of whinging about how awful the British political system is, and how corrupt things are over here. And
meanwhile,
you're in France.
It's the same everywhere.
Greasing each other's park. Well, exactly. I would
is the
certainly,
same everywhere. Yeah?
Other than to joke and try and wind Pierre up, I would never.
Maybe Norway is better. Norway.
I don't think there are places that are definitely worse. I mean, that aren't democratic at all for a start.
Well, I think you've got certain cultures that probably are. I've always said this about the Swedes, and in the few times I've been there, they seem to be quite honest. They seem to be quite straight talking.
Did you see what happened this week?
What's that?
They elected first female prime minister.
Oh yeah, and she had to bail within a day.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. But they seem to be more honest. But then you might have a culture that might be intrinsically more honest, but that probably just makes more fertile ground for the few people who are dodgy. Who knows? Yeah. Anyway, I'll never generalise about a country other than just to jokingly be xenophobic.
Yeah, except for France.
Except for France, who obviously deserve it.
Yeah.
Hey,
what's Richard done?
Well, so the thing about it is
misappropriation of funds.
Thing that I thought, so he got done for complicity in the misuse of public funds. The thing he sort of pouted.
Wait, sorry, I have one more. Platini with FIFA.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Not FIFA, but UEFA.
Yeah.
Pierre doesn't need us to have a go at the French.
And then there was another guy.
He just knows it better. We know that.
So FIFA, you have Sepp Blatter, right? And there was a second guy in command. I forgot his name, but he was also super dodgy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. All those organisations are filthy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all this stuff like you see on Twitter right now that the next World Cup's going to be in Qatar.
Yeah, and you can't really drink there. He was asked what about this? You can't really drink there. He's like, well, we're FIFA, and they'll have to basically bend their rules for us.
Yeah, because I fancy
Jerome
a
Valk.
glass of wine.
That was his name. Yeah. Anyway,
I know, and there's all this other stuff about how there's lots of virtue signalling going on in sport right now, and obviously parts of the Middle East are not the most progressive in terms of their social attitudes.
They arrested a journalist there for just investigating the World Cup,
just doing anything. Yeah. And yet, I bet you no one's going to be doing any kneeling or rainbow shoelaces when they get over there. Anyway, that's a complete tangent. But the thing that was interesting, and I might read out a bit of a quote from this Stéphane Richard, is that they seem to find. So this was an appeal.
Yeah.
He's previously found innocent, and then there was an appeal.
It dragged on for a hell of a long time as well, hadn't it? I mean, clearly
this is an appeal. And what strikes me, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems weird if Richard's quote is accurate that they found a new charge during the appeal process.
Right.
I mean, appeal should just be, was the original verdict good or bad?
So
they shouldn't be finding new
up,
shit and accusing him of sort of victimising domestic animals or something. Which wasn't one of them, but
it also makes you more sceptical in a way, doesn't it, of his sort of defence, surely, because if they've gone and looked at it and then found something else that was amiss.
I suppose so. Yeah, you've got a point there where I'm just a bit of a stickler for due process and things
maybe that was part of the due process thing. They just sort of came
But that's what I'm questioning. I don't know whether that's how it works with appeals. I thought appeals were just meant to relitigate what happened before rather than find new shit.
Well, I don't know the French system, though. I don't know how it works over there.
Well, so this is what he goes, during the protest, I'm not going to do a French accent, don't worry. Especially not with my cold.
I was
doing an Arsene Wenger impression.
No, I feel more self-conscious doing it in front of a Frenchman. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's going to be shit. I'm not going to claim it's going to be good. But,
thank you.
There we go. So I'm not going to bother. During the process, the charges have shifted.
I think you should get Pierre to read it.
With a French accent. Yeah.
Well, you've got a French accent anyway.
With a hand up, sort of Inspector Clouseau accent.
Yeah.
During the process, the charges have shifted from fraud to complicity in fraud and then to my full acquittal. So he's kind of going over the whole stuff. And now today, to the dismissal of the complicity in fraud charge, but a verdict on a new charge of complicity in the misuse of public funds. Now, a lot of this seems really semantical. Yeah. I'm struggling to work out what the difference is, but presumably there is a legal difference.
Well, he's picked up on the thing that you were saying was a bit odd. That's his
and
case.
He goes, it's totally incomprehensible and profoundly unjust. I simply carried out a ministerial decision to go to arbitration for which, and this is where it's funny, because him and Christine Lagarde obviously are not fucking on each other's Christmas card list.
No.
I simply carried out a ministerial decision to go to arbitration for which Christine Lagarde assumed complete responsibility and for which she was then found guilty of simple negligence as opposed to complicated negligence. I will now leave it to the board of directors any decision in respect to my mandate at Orange. And they went, yeah, cheers, mate, off you go, was their decision.
So is he walking out with tons of cash from Orange?
Well, yeah, he's resigned.
There's no way that they give him tons of cash.
Oh, they will have. Oh,
You
don't
reckon?
you worry.
To
That's
send
how it
him
works
away?
at the top table, mate. They all take care of each
But
other.
I find that hard to believe, because if it comes out that he's had some kind of golden handshake, he's left in ignominy. Yeah, he's not left like, I'm going. I've done my business at Orange. I'm resigning. He was forced to resign because he's a criminal. If it comes out that they've gone and paid him off, like, and given some extra bonus, and this is let's not forget, sorry, that this is a quarter owned by the French state, Orange,
which is half the reason he had to bail.
So if they've gone and done that after he's been convicted of being a criminal with a suspended 1-year jail sentence, that will be a hugely dodgy thing for them to do.
Which is such a laughable sentence. I mean, either he's a criminal or he's not.
He's a criminal.
Suspended 1-year jail sentence. That's bullshit, isn't it?
But a suspended sentence is still a conviction.
No, I'm not downplaying his criminality. I'm just saying, as far as punishments go, it's pretty low.
On paper, he's a criminal.
Benzema just had the same this week.
What?
Benzema, the Real Madrid striker.
And he was done for some much more full-on stuff, wasn't he?
Conspiracy.
I go along with people have been wrongly convicted before of doing things, and maybe he's an innocent man and his case is valid. But on paper, he's a criminal. As far as the government and the state is concerned, he's a criminal. And therefore, if they go and if a company that's a quarter owned by the state goes and gives him some kind of golden handshake to disappear, then that's very dubious move. I think that will come back and bite them. That's the sort of thing Les Echos is going to get hold of in the future and
hope so.
Orange paid off. Orange gave him some,
Okay, but how much outcry was there about Lagarde being made president of the ECB?
Well, I know, but it shouldn't have happened, though, should it?
No. Well, maybe there was some kerfuffle. I mean, we never know.
So are we worried? Is he going to be okay cash-wise?
I think he'll be all right. I think he's
going to find
another job. Done all right in previous years.
I think he's going to be kept in
Orangina
for a while.
Job.
Maybe on Facebook.
He'll float around, not doing much, and then he'll pop up somewhere doing, something.
Was he a good CEO? Otherwise,
he was CEO and chairman.
Was he good? Did you do good to the business?
So this is more sort of relevant to telecom, maybe now.
Bringing it back.
I mean,
let's look back on his tenure.
My perception is that he's been quite an effective CEO of Orange. I mean, they've if you look at
compared to Gavin Patterson, how would you
much more so?
Oh, okay.
Much more. I think Gavin Patterson was a disaster personally for BT. I don't think he was a very good CEO at all in any way.
He was too busy saving people from drowning on California beaches.
All he wanted to do was spend money on TV rights, which is a very questionable thing for operators to be getting
medallions.
Into. Yeah.
What?
Presumably, the whole Hasselhoff look, he's got to have a medallion.
Yeah. Maybe I'm being unfair. I think the one thing that he did, which is actually quite a big thing, and is what he'll be remembered for, was the EE takeover, which is probably for them to get back into mobile, I think was a sensible thing to do. So he wasn't a disaster. I'm totally exaggerating.
And for them to even get it through,
to get it through Ofcom as well and everything, that was a good move. But Stéphane Richard, I think he's been quite an effective boss at that company. I mean, they've got they've had their problems, I think, largely for competitive reasons in some of their big markets, like France with the entry of Iliad, and more recently in Spain, which is really. I mean, we were at a press conference where they were talking about that, how competitive that market's become. There's a lot of MVNOs in, and everybody seems to be struggling there. It's not unique to Orange, but I think operationally they're a really well-managed, well-run company. They've been well ahead of the curve on fibre rollout and the need for infrastructure investments. They were ahead of the curve on convergence, and are actually one of the telcos that's made that work, I think. They've never got sort of carried away with this whole, let's go and spend ridiculous amounts of money on sports rights.
And where they've tried to diversify, they seem to have done it a bit more cunningly, like with banking.
Yeah, I mean, the banking
like
thing, I still think there's big question marks over the banking move, but I also think it's something that could come good in the future.
But they haven't done it through big M&A.
No, they haven't. I mean, there was a bit of M&A. I think they bought Groupama, didn't they? They bought into Groupama, but it wasn't. Yeah. I don't think it was like a ridiculous amount they spent.
It was like Ericsson, who've just gone mad.
No, it wasn't like that. So, as incumbents go in Europe, I have quite a positive view of Orange, and I think also the things that we talk about to do with the nitty gritty, things like Open RAN and 5G and how they approach some of those areas. Their technical executives are very, very astute, I think, and almost ahead of the curve. I think they're keen and interested in the workings of the technology. They have more interest than other operators, I think, in knowing how things function and actually wanting to explore it themselves and getting involved in it. But they're also quite measured. I mean, they didn't race to this whole sort of let's go and roll out 5G as quickly as we can and stay ahead of the market. They're kind of like they take a sort of more measured approach to it, I think. Yeah, I think some of that's going to come from him, I think, surely, and the culture he sort of instills. So
yeah, there was one thing I will slightly push back on behalf of the only person who's commented on the story on Telecoms.com, a Mark W. Cutton.
Well, everything I've said is without reference to the share price, because I don't know how that's done under him. But
this is just anecdotal. This is just some bloke putting his 10 cents worth in, but we might as well read it out. He goes, could not happen to a more deserving fellow. Cannot say gentleman nor bon homme.
Oh, okay.
I know, this bloke's obviously just doesn't like him. He gutted Orange TV's budget when it was overtaking C+, which I think is Canal Plus.
Yeah.
And then, after devaluing the platform, attempted to sell the skeleton to his crony friends at Canal Plus. His tenure is a disaster. So there's another perspective.
Well, look, the new owners of Canal Plus have destroyed Canal Plus.
That sounds to me, like it's somebody who has an axe to grind, who was involved maybe in the TV business.
No, it's quite specific
and
feedback.
Also saying that selling it to your friends, I mean, let's be honest, this is one of the problems with French business, yeah? They've all gone to the same grande école. You know, they all know each other. You know, it's more. People go on about the coziness of Boris Johnson's cabinet and how they all went to Eton. Well, Orange's senior executives are all like that. They all went to. They probably all went to the same school.
It's a funny thing about France when you consider that they've had a revolution and we haven't.
Yeah.
That it says more not about France but about human nature. You can have a revolution which is intrinsically hostile to the aristocracy in its apparent nature, and then over time the aristocracy reasserts itself just in a different guise. Yeah. Obviously, you don't have royalty and Marie Antoinette and that sort of thing, but you do have these grand écoles, and you do have these people like Christine Lagarde and Stéphane Richard who all sort of know each other.
It's very
and they're all scratching each other's backs a little bit.
French society. I mean, Pierre should talk about this because I'm probably talking.
He hasn't lived there for a while.
I'm probably talking total bullshit, but my perception as an outsider is it's quite a stratified sort of society.
You reckon more so than England?
I'm not saying more so than England, but for a country that has liberty, fraternity, égalité as its sort of little motto,
égalité is the second one.
There's kind of a lot of merde.
That should be the fourth one.
Yeah.
I mean, we have equal amounts of shit in this country. I'm not saying we're better, but
which actually brings it back to this case before I move it on. I quite like it when people who seem to be really card-carrying members of the upper establishment get done over. Not because I know anything about the case, not because I know anything about Stéphane Richard's personality or his culpability or anything like that. I just like to see signs every now and then of there being accountability further up the food chain.
Yeah.
So I sort of celebrate it on that level.
You're never surprised. Yeah.
Well, you are surprised when anyone who's that far up gets done. It's more typical is someone like Christine Lagarde who then just gets promoted upwards outside of her scandal. You know, I don't know how good she is. She's presumably really smart and really well connected and really educated, but she's still one person.
I think
why does she have to be head of the ECB?
Did you look at all at what had happened to Orange's share price after Richard got...
I didn't. I can try have a quick butcher's.
I mean, if you look at that, because that'd be interesting, is whether the markets themselves and investors are thinking this is really bad news for Orange, and without Richard in charge. I mean, some CEOs, you know, are really instrumental in their company's success, aren't they? And without them, you kind of think, well, things are going to be totally different now that they've lost this guy. I mean, you might even say that to some extent, throwing the conversation back to Ecom. If Ecom had left...
It was a day ago.
Yeah, 25th. There is a dip.
There's a dip on the 25th, but it's not big, is it?
Well,
but there are some CEOs who become almost the representative of the company, and they're such visionaries that...
Well, he's been there for 10 years.
That removing them would be such a disastrous thing. Now, like, I don't think there's any operator I can think of, actually, that has a CEO like that. I don't think there's any telco has... A boss who if that person left, you worry about.
And the succession
plan
presumably been in place ever since this.
So I'd be very surprised if the market had gone, oh my God, Orange is in a terrible position because Richard's left.
No, I'm telling you now that today's price is 9.67. What's that?
As in the dip was worse opening this morning than yesterday.
Yeah, but But in a broader context,
It's 30 cents.
today's price is €9.67. You know, at the start of the month, it was
9.9.
below that.
Yeah.
Start of the month, it's 9.43.
So basically, it's had a negligible impact on the share price.
Yeah.
It's not like anybody's gone, oh no,
Yeah.
without Richard, or the opposite. Oh, without Richard, things are going to be much better. They've not really. Investors aren't really troubled by this, are they?
I mean, the overall share price was lower.
I think two
in
of the people
October.
who could take over, I think two who are likely successors are Ramon Fernandez, who's the CFO, who, despite his very Spanish name, is French.
It's allowed.
Probably has Spanish parents.
Maybe
I'm
he's
guessing.
Basque.
Well, they do have a border with Spain.
And
so
I've
you
met
get a
him.
bit of that.
I've met him a few times, and he's the CFO. I mean, he's a very impressive figure, I think.
Right. So that would be similar to Nick Reed stepping up at Vodafone, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
He was the CFO, wasn't he?
I have a very favourable view of Ramon
fair
Fernandez,
enough.
having had some interaction with him, and he just seems quite astute and capable as a person who could come in. And then the other one's a guy called Gervais Pellissier, who's I think head of
His last name is Policier.
Pellissier.
Pellissier.
Yeah, not Spanish for
I
police.
think that's right. Gervais Pellissier, I think, but he's one of the deputy CEOs as well. Again, seems quite. I mean, they have a lot of senior executives who are very capable.
Yeah.
And I don't think if they were going to promote up rather than look outside the group to get somebody, which they could always do as well. I think they have a lot of people there that you
Well,
could.
Patterson's
There's
still
also
looking for a gig,
what's
I
her
think.
name, Marie-Noël Yego-Lavisière, who's the
You're so much
head
better
of-
at foreign than I am.
head of Orange Europe. She was the former kind of CTO role.
Right.
It's feasible that they could look to sort of appoint somebody like
So
that.
one
But they
thing I want to say to move on, because we're running out of time, we've got to get our last segment. I certainly don't want to mention Tim stuff because we've banged on about this for so long. And I was going to say this earlier on when we were talking about the Ericsson thing. You know, we were saying how Boy Ekholm, we don't think, has done a great job of selling it. I think the perfect environment for him to sell it to the outside world is come on this fucking podcast.
Boy Echo.
Yeah, and have us throw some questions at him, and then he can explain it. If he can convince us, he can convince everyone. So waiting for Boyer. And I'd say the same for the new Orange CEO. He needs to come on and explain why he's going to be even better.
We can always go and ask the PR people at Ericsson and
Well, they
and
listen to
Orange
this. You're listening now. Come on, bring it on. So yeah,
that'd
I think
probably
we should
help
do that.
traffic.
We are going to. I'm hoping next year. I've had a few email conversations.
Not that we need it.
No, we
Not
don't
that we
like
need it, but it would be.
We might even get to. Okay, I'm not going to say anything. I've had a few email conversations. We might get some more execs on.
Yeah,
next
that's
year.
good.
I think they've seen enough of what we do to think, all right, we can come on. We know they drink beer and they talk shit, but I can get my head around it.
But we're happy to drink other things as well.
Yeah,
Aquavit.
like whiskey. Oh, Aquavit. Yeah,
Maybe not Aquavit,
we could get some pickled herrings lined up for Boyer.
we could do some pickled
Make him
herring.
fit. He actually lives in the States. He probably doesn't give a fuck about Swedish food anymore.
No, when I spoke to him, he was going about watching the ice hockey.
Yeah.
So he's become a true American.
Which city? Where does he live?
I don't know whereabouts in America he lives actually, but he does live in. I think he splits his time actually, but he's mainly in America. I think.
Busy man.
Yeah.
Busy man,
I
flying
think
around
so.
his
I think
private
so.
jet. Anyway, so let's just knock that on head. But honestly, I mean, I'm saying it largely tongue in cheek. The chances of the CEO of a massive multinational coming into this studio and putting up with our bullshit
We
is
could go to
very
them.
small.
We could bring the studios to them.
We could bring a studio to them.
Yes,
But
that's more likely.
But the thing that I mean that isn't jokey is if you're struggling to sort of convince people, and this is what I feel about podcasting and what I feel about sort of modern internet-enabled communications in general. I think authenticity is massively in demand. And the thing about podcasting, the thing about Joe Rogan, is if you're in front of Joe Rogan for 3 hours, any bullshit is going to get filtered out. Any bullshit's going to get found out. And it's a great opportunity to present your authentic self. It's obviously a terrible situation to be in if you're just trying to go with fluff and PR.
We won't have to get them in the studio or
spin.
go to them because basically we're all going to be back on Zoom again, aren't we, in a few weeks?
Don't.
So we can just do.
Hold on, I thought I was the pessimistic one.
Don't.
You caught up with me in the space of an hour. You caught up with me. Anyway, let's move on to the last thing. Let's talk about Jamie's wind mast.
Jamie's wind.
He's been back home for a bit. He's had 12 pints of braise. He's got a bit of wind. So he pitches to us. I mean, it was a press release that went out generally, but perhaps partly because he knows us and partly because he knows that we're such important journalists, he bothered to ring us up as well. So Vodafone's come up with this idea where in hard-to-reach areas, the old connecting the unconnected, those sort of last 10% of the country or whatever, where it's a nightmare to connect one fucking sheep farmer who for some reason needs to have gigabit broadband. Just to keep track. Well, it's true. I mean, that'd be an IoT thing, wouldn't it? Just stick a little sensor on their ear.
Cows.
Yeah.
Why not sheep?
So for connected sheep.
Can't discriminate between your animals.
No, certainly not. And and so one of the reasons it's difficult to build a phone mast and base station and all that in the middle of nowhere isn't just getting there, isn't just the sort of return on investment of creating a radius of connectivity for fuck all people. It's also because you've got to rig the thing up to the grid, to the electrical grid. Which presumably,
if you put the antenna in the first place, isn't it because there are people there? Meaning, if there's people,
but not many.
Power?
But they've got this thing called the Shared Rural Network Initiative (SRN), which is an agreement between all 4 network operators to extend mobile coverage to 95 or 97, I can't remember, but the high 90s percentage of the population by 2025, and that involves putting base stations in communities where it's really hard to get power, basically.
Oh, okay.
Like the civil engineering work that will be required to take power to some of these places. Some of the most isolated places would be, I think in Vodafone's press release, it's described as insurmountable.
I was just thinking, we need to sell power
if
the
there's
antenna.
people there who've got electricity, why is it difficult? You've got to also bear in mind that base stations are often put on top of a hill or something.
Right.
So they're not necessarily in the middle of towns.
It's getting it out into the countryside, like somewhere in the Lake District or something, in sort of a remote hamlet in the Lake District where the mast is actually sitting on some hill somewhere, and connecting it up to the power supplies is just difficult.
I wonder what kind of backup. Wind is not constant.
So right.
Yeah.
Well, this is the story, isn't it?
So there's 2 things they're doing.
Man on the street question.
Man on the street. Yeah, what happens when there's not any wind?
Yeah.
Well, these turbines they've got are made by a Welsh company called
Crossflow Energy.
Crossflow Energy. Sorry?
Batteries.
So there's a battery pack that comes with it that gets charged up.
Our little
and it uses what's called slow wind or light wind.
Do you know, I didn't look into they look like the wheels that are on riverboats.
To me, it looked like a whirligig.
No, like a lawnmower kind of.
That sort of thing. Old school lawnmower.
You sort of blow on it. And it spins round even. The lightest winds will make this thing turn. So it's not like a big heavy turbine. I don't know how many watts.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. How many watts does an antenna need?
Say a number. Whatever number you say, he's going to go, nah.
Million watts. It will turn in the lightest of winds. And on days when so it's not like one of those big heavy turbines that requires a lot of like a really windy day to work. So they make a big deal of the technology they've developed for it to be able to do this. And it also is able to kind of harvest the energy and store it in a battery pack. But the other thing is the sites would also have solar as well. So you basically have two backups. You've got a battery, you've got solar, and you've got this thing that will work in very light winds. And the hope is that
wind at night,
if that all works, then you wouldn't need to have a diesel backup generator or the need to run power out to the sites, basically.
And I think on the surface,
change the battery every few years.
Yeah, you'd have to do that. Yeah, probably.
On the surface, that makes total sense. I mean, this is the renewable energy dream.
Yeah.
The problem with renewable energy is we've been having during all this COP26 stuff, which turned out to be largely bollocks. I don't know if you agree, but I can't remember anything positive coming out of COP26 other than
they said they made a deal.
Oh, there was agreement.
A bunch of idiots flying in on private jets.
There was an agreement to phase down coal. Scott, phasing down. Have you heard of that before?
Phasing down.
It's not vague at all.
Yeah.
Phasing down's not even a thing, is it? You phase something out, you don't phase it down.
And you phase it down until the renewable sources fail, and then you suddenly have to power up this knackered old power station.
Yeah.
and kick-start it. Go, fuck, we've got no energy.
All those things are total waste of time anyway.
I think a small nuclear thing is...
Yeah,
they're all just talking shops.
Give the French credit. French have always been ahead of the curve.
All those things are actually... All those COP things are things that actually increase global emissions from all the people flying in to do it. They're just talking shops.
One of the rare areas in which I agree with Greta Thunberg. I mean, she's a bit of a puppet and a bit of a pain in the arse, but she's completely right.
Yeah, but
call out the greenwash.
She still turned up to it, didn't she?
Yeah, but only to moan. Well, she did a bit of dancing, I seem to remember. And everyone's going, oh, bless her, look at her having a bit of a giggle for once.
But so, do we believe this is a good thing then?
So
it's going to work?
I think I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing for green reasons. I just think it sounds like a practical solution.
Cool. It's very cool.
It might cost them a lot less to do it. Now, they don't have any cost projections at the moment of what impact it could make because
do they have a prototype? Have they tried it?
Yeah, they're doing proof of concepts now.
Yeah, so they're actually going to wax them up on.
So there's no plans yet to do it on a sort of wide scale. But if these proof of concepts work out, the idea is that it could actually be used in the Shared Rural Network Initiative.
That replaces the need for like Starlink in a way.
As well, yeah. If you could pull it off,
yeah.
I
didn't consider that in my coverage.
Or fixed wireless access or whatever.
I should have.
Pierre's starting to get cute now. He thinks he wants to should be a journalist.
Oh shit!
I mean, it's the shortest story I've ever written. I think I like reading.
Yeah, by your standards, you tend to write quite long ones.
I sort of did about 300 words on it.
Yeah, that is pretty short for you. That's about what I did. That's about what I did, but that's not so abnormal for me. So one thing I'll say, that the big caveat, whenever you think of something like this that's totally powered on renewable energy, and they wouldn't have got it to this proof of concept stage unless they'd done their due diligence and thought they might be able to pull it off, is then you think, well, why the fuck aren't we doing it everywhere if it's such a great idea? And the point is...
Well, it's expensive.
Expensive.
So many
expensive
parts
is capex, but cheapest anything for OPEX. Anyway, but that's not the real reason. The point is there is obviously a cap on the amount of energy these renewable sources can supply, which will probably work if all you're having to do is do connected sheep. But it wouldn't work for any kind of more dense population.
No, but they don't do it everywhere because now the wind turbine is going to degrade, the solar panel is going to degrade, the battery is going to degrade. It's a huge amount of maintenance.
I honestly don't think that's the reason, mate. I think the reason is that there's a peak to the amount of energy that you can generate. This is why renewables aren't bigger than they are. There's a peak to the amount of energy you can generate. And even more importantly, there's a peak to the amount of energy you can store. So in principle, if battery storage was perfect, then you just stick tons of turbines on top of a hill, or in the middle of the ocean or whatever, and then you just store, and then when there's no wind, no worries. But because storing electricity is difficult...
No, the ultimate irony is that they have to shut down so many turbines because the grid can't take it.
Exactly. And there
because there's power coming from somewhere else. Yeah.
And they actually, even worse, they end up paying them.
Yeah.
So the people who make the turbines, they pay them to not produce electricity. How fucked up is that?
Crazy.
Did you... don't normally mention competitors on the podcast,
but
did you
read
afraid
of anyone?
Just say
there's a journalist called Martin Warwick who's been in the industry for absolutely years.
Telecom TV, we know. Oh God, we mention Telecom TV all the time. Every time Ray comes up.
He's 80 now or something.
Right.
But did you read his coverage of it?
I didn't.
So he wrote a really long, because I think he generally sort of picks up a quirky story once every 2 weeks. He's pretty much semi-retired and spends quite a lot of time on it.
All right, when he
did a sort of 1,000-word piece, but it's really funny. He had expressions in it. There's the one that I liked on the green front was that it's going to make them greener than Kermit the Frog after a blowout 12-course chlorophyll banquet.
Oh, wow.
But he did this sort of allusion to paintings from the sort of 19th century that had pictures of watermills in and things like that, and how this is a kind of... Anyway, it's... Telecom TV, it's a really funny piece. He's a good writer.
He is a good writer. Yeah. No, I've got no problem calling it Telecom TV. They're all good lads. But, I mean, the long and short of it is, like in the press release, there was a bit of the sort of standard, like I wrote my third paragraph, inevitably a fair bit of Voda's rhetoric around this tends towards eco-virtue signalling, but there are more tangible, practical reasons to go down this road. And those are the ones that we've just been exploring. I mean, if it works, and you've got a self-sustaining base station, then of course it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So the two big caveats are it will only work in very low demand environments.
Yep.
And then
But it's only intended for those.
Yeah.
it's only intended. I know.
Yeah.
But it's still worth stressing.
Yeah.
And the other one is, when they start shoehorning this just goes towards all our commitments to be covered in moss by 2030.
Yeah.
Then you're just like, all right, give it a rest. There's a business reason for doing it.
Yeah.
Don't try and conflate it with you being a good person.
I think your point about it only working is a good one, because it's not actually going to reduce anything, is it? They don't have sites in these areas anyway.
No.
If they used power, if they did dig up hills and put like civil engineering work down there and put a big diesel generator there, then that would just be making things worse.
Yeah.
By using these little turbines, they're just keeping things level.
So they're a low.
So they're not.
What they are is they're a very low footprint way potentially of getting connectivity to the last 5 to 10%
bit.
of the
Exactly.
country. And that's fine. They should be commended for that. I just always get.
Do you know the big issue I have with the green thing
Yeah.
that the telcos come out with? The one that really irks me is this, because there's these different scope of emissions. Scope 1, 2, and 3. Have you not looked into the
Not
scopes?
really. I'm so
You should read up on the
jaded
scope
about everything
stuff, mate.
green.
So scope 1 is stuff that you have control over, and scope 3, like direct control over, so like reducing your own like use of energy and
Farting less.
using renewables. And then the other side of it is scope 3, which is basically like your suppliers and your customers. Because if you're
Right, so indirect.
it's indirect. So if you're buying products from a company that isn't green at all and that's heavily polluting, then by implication you're just feeding you're kind of feeding the flames, yeah?
So you can sort of help by making decisions in a green way for
you
down
can,
the food
but
chain.
this is the issue I have with it, because a lot of the stuff about becoming completely green by 2025 or 2030 or 2040, whatever it might be, includes the scope 3 stuff. Scope 2 is somewhere in the middle of the two.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact definition of scope 2, but scope 3, the one that really irks me is an operator can say to its suppliers, if you don't do this, we're not going to buy from you. But what operator is going to say to any customer, unless you're using renewable energy at your home, we're not going to sell you a broadband product? Of course. And that's the one that I always find.
And it's really pernicious as well, the precedent they're trying to set.
Well, they can't do it though. They don't have any control over what their customers are doing.
I know, but imagine they could, and then they go and grass you up, and they go, I reckon Scott's.
I have to say that's
got a
where
log
the whole
fire in his front room.
That's where the whole thing's just complete bullshit, because these companies want to make money. Yeah, they might decide to buy from someone else because they're not being green enough, and somebody else is. But there's no way they're going to stop selling to customers who just go and use their... I mean, what control do they even have over it? They have no ability to control what energy supplies come into 48A Swaffield Road. By the way, it's none at the moment because my company just went bust this week.
You just totally doxed yourself.
Oh, Christ, what were people going to send bombs to my house because I'm on the Telecoms.com podcast? I don't think.
What was that one that went bust this week?
Bulb went bust this week,
and
which
that's
we were using, yeah.
Mine went bust a little while back. I had Planet something or other, and they went bust, and I just got a letter going, you're with Shell now, fucking deal with it. It's just bizarre.
You mean talking about power, yeah?
Yeah.
Same thing. I was with SSC now. They said it's still SSC, but it's part of another group.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of this happening. I got letters
crash.
through the post this week from a company called Octopus, who seems to be taking over, according to...
But you don't have anything to do.
No.
So, yeah.
No.
But you also don't when you're saying it, you just feel like a pawn in this.
I think
great
the whole
game.
thing that basically all these energy companies, it's a total tangent now, but all these energy companies have basically become nationalised, haven't they?
Seems like a waste of
They're
paper.
just sort of propped up by the government because they can't afford to run themselves anymore. Because
Yeah.
of these ridiculous arrangements that the government's had to do with subsidies.
And another tangent back to your whole secondary and tertiary eco-ness.
Yeah.
As a sort of quite rabid civil libertarian, as soon as they start setting precedents in where they go, you're not just responsible for your shit, but you've got to sort of evangelize. You've got to kind of virally spread your virtue onto the people around you, the people you have commercial arrangements with. That really gives me the creeps, if I'm honest.
Totally.
Right, should we wrap it up there?
Sounds like
I think we're
good
good.
time to do that. Yep.
And it's round about the 4:30 that Pierre was asking for, so we're all good. Okay, so I hope that wasn't. Was that a depressing podcast? I think we were all right.
You were a bit depressing at the start, mate.
It's okay. Well, cheered up after that.
I've still got a cough. Thanks for watching, and make sure you join us for the next one.